Malay prose is still held in doubt, because right-wing Malay ethno-nationalist academics in Malaysia do not regard him as a Malay. They regard him as an Indian. So he cannot be the forerunner of contemporary Malay prose. There you go. See, so that sort of debate, the kaum tua, kaum muda debate, was actually a debate between two different interpretations of normative Islam that tried to basically create two different sorts of societies. The traditional society that they were trying to change also was reeling against the pressure of colonial intervention at the time. I won't go into the political economy of the peninsula. Just very briefly, when we look back at the history of pre-colonial Malay Peninsula, also goes back to your question earlier, we look at the sort of economies, the feudal economies that were created then. They were basically agrarian-based economies, maritime economies. You have a standard mode of, a capital that would be at the mouth of a river facing the sea, so it would be a sort of entrepot economy. This is the pattern we see in Perak, Kedah, Pahang, Terengganu, Kelantan. Standard case of a centralized royal polity that would be taxing all commerce up and down river and along the coast as well. But of course this meant very weak sense of territoriality and no sense of a common, common Malay identity across the peninsula. Now, these economies would then change radically over the period of 100 years that followed. First with the creation of the Strait settlements, and later after the forward movement as colonial rule went into the Malay heartlands. Because the first thing you saw was the change of the local political economy. Of course, the new industries that were introduced were rubber, tin, and then later on palm oil. And this basically meant having to not only import large numbers of migrants who were A, non-Malay and B, non-Muslim, but it also meant changing power relations between the Malay kings and the colonial administrators. Where basically the Malay kings, very much like the Javanese kings in Java as well, in the end ended up being contracted agents who were basically serving the interests of foreign capital, and whose job basically is just to keep the natives passive and control them through the use of religious rights, very conservative religious rights. So you begin to see by the 1920s the Malay states adapting to the reality of colonial rule by in a way imitating many of the functions of colonial rule in the Strait settlements. Very, very early examples of this would include the creation of a native police force, a native bureaucracy, but what is more important as far as Islam is concerned is that because of the Bangkok Treaty in 1874 that divides the realm of power and authority between governance and religion, the Malay rulers basically really had any real power left only in the space of Islam. So it's very interesting to note that from the 1920s onwards, in these Malay states, the Malay rulers begin to create their own Islamic bureaucracies. The Jabatan Agama Islam becomes the center of royal power in places like Pahang, Terengganu, Kelantan, Perak and Kedah. The kings begin to dominate religion because that's the only thing, that's the only space they have left. Now this of course means total all-out war between the kaum muda and kaum tua, because it's precisely in the area of religion that the kaum tua reformers want to introduce modernization. It's precisely when it comes to things like the reading and interpretation of the Quran, when it comes to the normative practice of Islam, that the reformers want to actually begin to reform Malay society. But that's precisely the domain that the royals and the aristocracy want to control. So if you look at the formation of Majlis Agama Islam in places like Kelantan, Terengganu, Pahang and the other Malay states, you see an almost total domination of the staff among the aristocracy and royal family. In Kelantan, for instance, the entire Majlis Islam Kelantan is dominated by the Kelantanese royal family. And this is a specific move to exclude the kaum muda reformers from actually gaining ground. So things more or less remain in this stalemate condition all the way up to the 1930s and 1940s. And until by the 1930s, another wave of change begins to visit the Malay Peninsula. And this is the wider change in the region of Southeast Asia as a whole. Of course, here is where, again, the interconnectedness between the Malay Peninsula, Sumatra, and the rest of Indonesia comes in. Thanks to improvements in communications, technology, transport, etc., as I said, in these cosmopolitan centers, news of what's happening in the Muslim world in general is being shared very quickly. But in these cosmopolitan centers, you have to remember that apart from the kaum muda Muslim reformists, there was also a younger generation of Malay and Peranakan nationalists who were also the pioneers of other social movements in Malaysia, including the trade union movement, the workers' movement, students' movement, etc. So by the 1920s and 30s, with the rise of nationalism in Indonesia, we begin to see